Okay, we're going to make a recording of one of the stories from Twinkle's Flourishing Friendship collection. This is called Prototypes and Partnerships, a tale of selfishness and science. Stella and Eli sat next to each other on the mat at the front of their classroom. Both children were grinning as they watched their teacher, Mr. Sharp, pretending to be disorganized. He was shuffling papers, unraveling cables, and purposely dropping a whiteboard marker. He was a mischievous teacher who liked to pull the leg of his students. Only last week, the class had gone out walking locally for Clean Up Australia Day, when Mr. Sharp had yelled out, "I found $50. He waved the note in the air so the students wandered in the vicinity could see it. The grounds around the school never looked as clean as they did after that walk. It was only later that they found out he had taken the note out of his wallet. The students all sat to attention, realizing the lesson had now begun. He flicked a switch, and on the interactive whiteboard, the words "Exhibition Day" appeared together with an image of a scientist in a white coat. The scientist was holding a beaker which was spewing forth a foaming green substance, and his hair was standing on end. "Exhibition Day," Mr. Sharp continued in his excited way, "is coming up." The students smiled at each other. They knew that this was going to be fun. Mr. Sharp handed out the project outline to each of the students. It listed everything they needed to know about their assignment. "First, I want to draw your attention to the marking rubric. Yes, it will be fun, but it will also be a tough project." He frowned and looked over the top of his glasses in mock seriousness. "You will be assessed as pairs. This means that your effort will affect your partner's grade. So for those of you who don't like to finish your work off, if you don't want to do well for yourself, perhaps you will do well for your partner." "Can we choose our own partners, Mr. Sharp?" Eli asked hopefully. "Yes, you can choose your partner in crime," he replied with a wink towards Stella. Eli and Stella chatted about their project on the way home. "How about we invent something that we can clean our rooms?" said Stella. I made a mistake there. Let's do this again. "How about we invent something that can clean our rooms?" said Stella. "That way we'll have more time to sleep." She was dragging her bag as she walked along the footpath. Eli laughed. "I think we should invent an energy zapper. Then when you sloth off, I can zap you." He made a sound like a laser gun. Pew, pew. They continued coming up with outlandish ideas and inventions all the way home. "Well, we'll have to think of something really quick so that we can start working on it," Eli said excitedly. He turned and waved his hand towards Stella. They'd reached his house and he was jogging up the driveway, ideas swirling around his head. "Gosh, it's so hot," Stella complained after him. "I wish I didn't have to walk the rest of the way home." She made a dramatic sweep of her brow. Eli laughed at her as he turned to go inside. The next morning, Stella was lying on one of the benches under the shade sail when Eli arrived at school. "Hey, are you all right?" "Yes, Mom made me walk to school. She said it would be good for me to get some exercise. But if exercise is good for you, why do I feel so lousy?" "Hey, listen," Eli said, ignoring her question. "I've got an idea for our project." "Oh, yeah, let's hear it then." Stella groaned as she sat up. "Well, Dad and I were talking about going camping." He paused. "I mean real camping. No toilets or showers, no camp kitchens, no luxuries, just us and the bush." He spread out his arms as if the bush was right there, all around them. "Right," said Stella, trying to follow the thread. "So we would need a survival kit. We would need to have basics, food, shelter, and water." He said water with emphasis. So we would need a survival kit. We would need to have basics: food, shelter, and water. He raised his eyebrows at Stella as if to suggest something. Right, Stella said again, not really understanding. Well, we can't carry too much fresh water. Well, I think I need to go back a little bit, guys, here and get this intonation right. Let's try this again. He spread out his arms as if the bush was right there, all around them. Right, said Stella, trying to follow the thread. So we would need a survival kit. We would need to have basics: food, shelter, and water. And he said water with emphasis, raising his eyebrows at Stella as if to suggest something. Right, Stella said again, not really understanding. Well, we can't carry too much fresh water with us, can we? Eli continued. Can you just tell me? I'm exhausted trying to figure it out, Stella complained, lying back down on the bench again. What if we could invent a way of cleaning water from ponds, streams, and springs that we find around the campsite? What do you think? Eli's voice had grown more enthusiastic. Ah, okay, Stella replied, still not sure what it was they were inventing. Great. My dad said he could help us a bit if we needed it. Well, that sounds better, Stella said, sitting up once more as the bell sounded for them to go to class. Mr. Sharp was leaning over a table of different coloured rocks, licking his lips and rubbing his stomach when the students entered the classroom. He flicked his fingers over several specimens dramatically, as if having trouble deciding which one to choose. Delicious, he muttered, finally grabbing a very dirty-looking red rock. He glanced towards his students, who had confused looks on their faces, then brought the rock up to his mouth and licked it. Ew, yuck, gross. Disgusted groans and giggles ran out from everyone in the room. Oh, Mr. Sharp, how could you? Said one girl, sitting close up to the front. She brought her knees up to her chest and hugged them as if to protect herself from the ickiness. He's just tricking, declared an observant boy sitting off to the side. He didn't really lick it, he just pretended. Everyone burst out laughing. Mr. Sharp, shrugging in defeat, put the rock down. Planning, he then roared, getting on with the lesson, is the most important part of a project. Exhibition day is just over 1 week away. He swung around dramatically and wrote the word planning on the whiteboard. He then wrote Exhibition day, Friday, and then the days of the week going backwards until he reached the previous Thursday. The key with planning, he continued, is to work backwards from the due date. Everyone take out your project outline. Think about what you and your partner need to do to get ready, and then have a go at planning, working backwards from exhibition day. And lastly, you'll need to have your draft proposals to me by first thing tomorrow morning. Stella pulled out their project outline and Eli scribbled. After he finished writing, Eli turned to Stella. Okay, so what do we need to do next? Well, I suppose we need to buy the bits for the prototype, Stella answered cautiously, scratching her head with her pencil. Her voice rose as she spoke, making it sound more like a question than an answer. She looked at Eli for support. Okay, so I need to do that one again with proper intonation. Well, I suppose we need to buy the bits for the prototype, Stella answered cautiously, scratching her head with her pencil. Her voice rose as she spoke, making it sound more like a question than an answer. She looked to Eli for support. Yeah, well, I think we need to give ourselves plenty of time to research and design and then to make it. But we need to write the proposal tonight. I'll come over to your house and we can do it together, he said confidently. Yeah, all right, said Stella, slumping down in her chair. After an early dinner, Eli hopped on his bike and rode over to Stella's house. He had been thinking of the design for the water cleaning invention and wanted to get some feedback from his friend. When Eli entered the room, Stella was lying on her bed, tummy down, with her head and arms draped over the edge. She held a game controller tightly, and an earphone was dangling out from one of her ears. Her eyes were fixed on the TV screen at the top of her drawers. She was talking to someone while playing and using gaming terms like OP, KO, and mob. Hey, Eli, look, I'm playing Wave Walker and winning. Yay, wow, that's cool. He stood watching, then remembered the reason why he was there. Hey, I've had this great idea for the project clan design. Want to see? I just need to finish this level, Stella said, moving her fingers over the controller with an intensity that did not match her relaxed posture. Eli sat down and pulled out his notes, scribbling annotations from his design while he waited patiently for Stella to finish playing. It took a long time for Stella to finish the level. GG, AFK, she murmured while typing on the keyboard. Then removing the earpiece, she rolled over onto her side and put her head on the pillow facing Eli. Okay, so what have you got? So I was thinking it needs to be really lightweight so that you can carry it easily. Eli pulled out a straw from his bag and Stella started laughing. Well, that's lightweight, she said with a giggle. She stretched for a moment, then tucked her hands back under the pillow. Hold on, said Eli, a little irritated. I was thinking about those water bottles with filters in them. You know the ones? Yep. We can put the filter in the straw. That way you could put it straight into the water source, and when you suck it, the water will go through the filter and it will be clean. What do you think? Ah, I get it. It's a giant filter straw thingy. That's pretty clever, Stella yawned. But did you have any ideas too, or anything that you wanted to add? Eli asked. Nah, sounds pretty good to me. Well, we need to write it down for our proposal to hand to Mr. Sharp tomorrow. Eli took out his pad and pen. He looked towards Stella, whose eyes were closed. Hey, Stella, come on, it's your turn. You can write it and I'll edit it before we hand it in. I am so tired though, and you know you're much better at writing than me, she replied without even opening her eyes. Oh, fine then, I'll finish it at home. See ya. Eli could feel the frustration rising in his voice, but Stella didn't seem to notice. See you tomorrow, she grunted as she pulled the quilt over her body and rolled away from her friend. The next day, after recess, Mr. Sharp shared all the group's proposals to the class. They sat on the floor and listened to the great ideas for different inventions. Mr. Sharp pulled an exaggerated, disgusted face at the invention of a mat that teaches your mutt to poop outside and drops a treat when it does. You'd better hope the treat doesn't drop in the wrong spot, said Mr. Sharp, screwing up his nose. Everyone burst into fits of laughter. Wow, I really like your invention, Mr. Sharp said, nodding towards Eli and Stella. Eli had explained the water straw to the class and was met with explanations like, whoa, that's so cool, and I'd use that from his classmates. Good job, partners in crime, Mr. Sharp winked at the pair. Thanks, Mr. Sharp, Stella responded. She shuffled in her spot, looked around grinning at her classmates, and sat up a little taller. Eli looked at her sideways, and Mr. Sharp went on to the next project. It was another blazing hot day, so on the way home that afternoon, Stella and Eli stopped for a lemonade ice block at the local shop. They sat at the bike park and slurped away, every now and then having a lick from the bottom of the fast-melting ice block before it dribbled on their hands. "Come over on Saturday," Eli suggested, looking towards Stella. "I've got some drink bottle filters and some pipe, and we can play around with our design." "Oh no," Stella complained. Her eyes were fixed on something between her feet. The last piece of her ice block was melting into the dirt. "That's so cruel." Eli stood up in front of her and continued talking fast and waving his free hand around with enthusiasm. "Dad said if we can decide on what we'll need, he'll take us to buy all the pieces to make the prototype on Sunday." "Yeah, all right," she said grumpily, eyeing what was left on Eli's stick. "Hello, Mrs. Kowalski. Is Ellie there? Is Eli there? It's Stella." Start this again. "Hello, Mrs. Kowalski. It's Eli. Is Stella there?" It was Saturday, and he'd been waiting over an hour for her to arrive and work on the design. "Hello, Eli, dear. Hold on a moment." Mrs. Kowalski put the phone down with a clunk. Returning some minutes later, she said, "Eli, she told me she's busy right now. I don't think she'll be over today." "Busy doing what?" Eli thought, putting the phone down. Disappointed, he headed out to the shed and worked all afternoon alone, pulling filtered drink bottles apart, noting the design and measurements, cutting the pipe and gluing bits together. By early evening, he had something resembling a large straw ready for testing. He stood back and looked at his creation, happy at what he'd managed to accomplish. "Stella's missing out," he thought with a sigh. Sunday came, and Eli decided to ride over once more to Stella's. His dad had told him to test the design, and then later that afternoon, they'd go and buy the items he needed to make a proper prototype. He wanted Stella to be involved in the testing, but when he got to the house, Stella was lying on the couch watching TV. Now, if you're listening to this story and you've only been listening so far, now is the time for you to get the story out and start following it word by word as I'm reading, because you would have heard that sometimes I'm making mistakes. So you might be actually able to find those mistakes with me. I'm going to give this to my little reader so that he can lie on the sofa and follow the rest of the story and find out what's really going to happen about this wonderful project. Sunday came, and Eli decided to ride over once more to Stella's. His dad had told him to test the design, and then later that afternoon, they'd go and buy the items he needed to make a proper prototype. He wanted Stella to be involved in the testing, but when he got to her house, Stella was lying on the couch watching TV. "Come on, Stella, you haven't done anything yet," Eli exclaimed. "And Mr. Sharp said it was a pears project." "I've got a sore tooth," Stella retorted, not taking her eyes from the screen, but moving her hand to the side of her mouth as if it would explain everything to Eli. Eli glared at her. "Well, we need to test the design so that we can build the final prototype." "Can't you do it? It's not that hard. And you know what you're doing. I don't ever get time to relax." Eli clenched his teeth, spun around and stomped out of the room without saying goodbye. He rode his bike back home through the park, unaware of the annoyed frown still on his face as he pulled into the driveway. "What, no Stella?" Dad asked, seeing his expression. "Nah, she's tired. She's always tired," he said, rolling his eyes. "I'll test it myself." He leaned his bike against the wall. "You're not going to drink dirty water," Dad said with a smirk. "I don't want to have to make a late night hospital run." "No, I'll just test that the water comes through the filter and the rest is sealed tight. His frown turned to a smile as his dad added, or perhaps you could test it, Dad. They both laughed. The newly named Swagman straw worked well, and Eli was pleased enough to go and buy the parts for the final model. In class, Stella mostly watched as Eli continued with the project. Whenever Eli asked her to help with something, she made up an excuse like she didn't know how, she couldn't concentrate, or needed to go to the bathroom. It's just easier to do it by myself, he thought, as Stella headed out of the classroom door again. Everyone make sure you're on page 72. It's got a big green banner across it called Exhibition Day. On Friday, the whole school gathered in the hall for Exhibition Day. The atmosphere all around was filled with excitement and curiosity. Display tables were set up around the perimeter with unusual and interesting contraptions on them. Propped up on each table were large boards full of information, diagrams, drawings, and photographs describing the ideas, designs, and uses of the inventions. Some students even dressed up to enhance their display. One girl in a safari suit was showcasing her camouflage idea. She'd used her interest in art to design bark-like pieces of material that you could use to blend into surrounding trees. Mr. Sharp was dressed up too. He wore glasses, a long white coat, and a long white beard to match. His hat was covered with small gadget-looking apparatus, little pieces of copper pipe and coils, nuts, bolts, wire, and small switches, some of which were lit with LED lights. Mr. Sharp stood up on the stage and coughed with a smirk into the microphone. Einsteins and Curies, may I have your attention, please? The crowd stopped milling around and looked towards the stage. We would like to welcome grandparents, parents, members of the community, teachers, students, and even a visiting scientist, Dr. Brunner, he said, nodding towards a young woman with a clipboard, and declare that our exhibition is officially open. People started to move around. Check out the exhibits and view some of the demonstrations. So if you have a look on these 2 pages now, anyone who's listening and following with the book or the PowerPoint, you'll see all the different sorts of exhibits that were there. And you might be able to spot where Eli and Stella's exhibit is. Have a look at the expression on Stella's face and compare it with the expression on Eli's face. Eli stood at their display table and confidently answered questions related to their invention. He could see Dr. Brunner among the group of onlookers. She was scribbling and what looked like ticking on her clipboard. I wonder what she's doing. While we're on that page, have a look at some other facial expressions. How about this, maybe granddad? Look at his eyes and his furrowed brow, his frown. I wonder what he's thinking about the project he's looking at. I wonder what this person is thinking who's got 2 thumbs up. And I wonder what it means when this guy has got a finger on his cheek and is resting an elbow in his other hand. His dad gave him the thumbs up from the back of the small audience, then continued exploring other displays. Stella mainly stayed behind Eli. She did not want to answer any questions, so she busied herself with moving things, opening and closing boxes under the table, and straightening up information handouts. Towards the end of the afternoon, Mr. Sharp made his way back on stage holding a Bunsen burner. He put the Bunsen burner to his mouth and coughed loudly. There were smiles and giggles from the audience. 1, 2, 1, 2, he said, tapping the top of the burner, feigning confusion as to why it wasn't working. More people gathered around the stage and began to laugh. Mr. Sharp, glancing towards the microphone, suddenly raised a finger in the air like he had an idea, and all of the LED lights on his hat flickered on, illuminating his mischievous face. He moved towards the microphone. We are drawing to the end of our wonderful exhibition day, but before we officially close the event, we have a special prize to award. There were murmurs from the students. They knew their work was being marked, but nobody knew there would be a prize up for grabs. The girl in the safari suit did a little jump of excitement. Mr. Sharp continued, Dr. Brunner and I have had the difficult task of judging the amazing range of different inventions here today. You would have to agree the students have done a fantastic job. He paused and the crowd clapped and cheered. However, we must choose an overall winner. This prize, which includes a 1-year subscription to the magazine Science Imagined and a voucher to the planetarium, goes to the students of a simple but ingenious little invention that we believe merits a special mention. Could the inventors of the Swagman straw please come to the stage? The whole room looked over to where Eli and Stella were standing. Eli's eyes grew wide, his chest puffed up, and he caught his breath. He was very aware that everyone in the hall now had their eyes fixed on him as he moved towards the stage, steadying himself before carefully placing one foot on the first step. A bump sideways shifted his attention and he lost his balance for a moment. Recovering, he looked up to see Stella striding up the steps, straight to Mr. Sharp, who had his hand outstretched, ready to shake. Time seemed to move in slow motion then. Eli, glued to the spot, heard Mr. Sharp say, "Well done." And Stella replied, "Thank you very much, Mr. Sharp." He then watched Stella as she moved to where Dr. Brunner was standing with the certificate and prize. Taking the items, she stood at the front of the stage, beaming, while the crowd clapped and cheered. Eli forced himself to make his way up to the stairs to Mr. Sharp, who again waited with an outstretched hand. Eli grasped it just when the school bell rang loudly. He didn't hear what Mr. Sharp said to him, although he could see his teacher's mouth moving. Mr. Sharp moved over to the microphone once more, and the moment passed. Well, it looks like we have to conclude there. Well done to all our young inventors, and a big thank you for all coming today. Eli stood uncomfortably at the back of the stage. He could see Dr. Brunner walk up to Stella and pat her on the back. Mr. Sharp was there too, and a group of people gathered around Stella. Eli turned and walked away. "Eli, Stella's on the front step." His dad raised voice battered on the closed bedroom door. "Again." "I've told you I don't want to see her, Dad. Tell her to leave." "She said you haven't returned her calls either." "You're going to need to face her sometime." "Dad, just tell her to go away," Eli yelled. Okay, I will." Some minutes later, Eli heard his dad near the door again. "It's from Stella," he said, and there was a gentle thud as something was left outside his bedroom door. Eli lay on his bed, staring up at the ceiling. He didn't want to hear what Stella had to say. After all, she's made so many excuses to get out of helping with the project, and even though she knew that they would be graded in pairs, she still did nothing. He folded his arms across his chest. She had let him do all the work, everything. But worst of all, Stella had taken the credit for it. She'd bumped him out of the way. She pushed her way on stage and shown the world that she deserved the prize and recognition. Eli clenched his teeth. It should have been the other way round. It should have been me, he thought. He raised himself up and leant on one elbow. Under the door, the shadow of the item that Stella had bought for him blocked the light from the hallway. The brown paper bag slid over when he opened his door. Eli laid back on his bed and pulled out the Science Imagined magazine from the brown paper bag. It was still in its plastic wrapping. An envelope revealed the planetarium voucher. It showed a dark image of a rounded ceiling with stars and constellations on it. The voucher was for a VIP visit for 2 people. His eyes wandered around his room as he thought about the last few days. Bits and pieces of construction materials, clothes, and books were lying on his floor. He felt angry about what had happened and sad because he missed his friend. If he was honest with himself, the only person he would take to the planetarium was Stella. The phone started ringing in the hallway. Eli opened his bedroom door. Dad, the phone's ringing. Dad! The phone continued to ring. Sighing, Eli lifted the handset. Hello, it's Eli, he said. Eli, it's Stella. Yep, what do you want? He replied, unable to control his anger. Well, I just wanted to say I'm really sorry, Eli. Yep, okay, see you later. No, wait. I realize now I haven't been much of a friend. I should have helped more, a lot more, and probably shouldn't have taken the credit. No, I definitely should not have taken the credit. Keep talking, Eli prompted, starting to feel a little better. Well, I also told Mr. Sharp, I said it was all your work, all of it, the design, the prototype, the write-up, everything. Yep, well, you're right about that. Stella's voice was hesitant. I was selfish. I'm sorry, and I really miss my friend. Eli thought for a moment. She had done the wrong thing, but at least she had told Mr. Sharp the truth. And she seemed genuinely sorry. Plus, he missed his friend too. He had an idea. Well, we haven't invented something to clean up our rooms yet, he smiled into the handset. So I guess you could come over and help me clean mine. On my way, was the excited response Eli heard before the phone clicked off. Eli grinned. Time to make this room a bit messier, he thought, pulling out a drawer and emptying it on the floor. The end. Now, there are some things in this story that you might like to look at, like the emotion words and the emotions that people show with their body language and their facial expression. And you might like to take a highlighter pen and just go through the story and highlight the words that you would like someone to explain to you. You might also be thinking that as a reader, I made some mistakes when you were following the page with me. That's okay. Most people make mistakes when they're reading aloud. The best thing to do is just try to do your best. I hope you enjoyed this story. I thought it was fantastic. Bye for now. You happy with that?
I accidentally paused that at the end because I thought you were done.